For 2 million years, humans wandered the earth as hunters and gatherers, living in the rhythm of seasons and herds. They followed the animals, collected the seeds, and moved on when the land could give no more. Not just survival, but a way of life, so ancient that it shaped every instinct we still carry today. What if one decision, made 10,000 years ago, changed the course of human history more than any other? In the Fertile Crescent, between two rivers that would witness the rise and fall of empires, something impossible began. The world was warming then, the great ice sheets retreating northward, leaving behind valleys rich with wild grasses and promise. Humans had survived the long winter of the Ice Age, but they were about to do something no species had done before. They were about to stop wandering and put down roots that would grow into cities, kingdoms, and civilizations. Imagine standing in that ancient valley, watching the first humans plant seeds with trembling hands, not knowing what would grow. The grasses grew tall there, wild wheat and barley swaying in winds that had blown since the world was young. Someone noticed that the seeds, if kept and planted, would grow again in the same place year after year. It seems simple now, this observation that would transform everything, but it required a leap of faith into the unknown. They would have to stay in one place through the changing seasons, trusting the earth to give back what they planted. They would have to defend that place from others who still wandered, from animals who would eat the growing grain. The first farmers were taking a gamble with their lives, abandoning the freedom of movement for the promise of abundance. And slowly, over generations measured in centuries, the gamble began to pay off in ways they could never have imagined. The planted fields yielded more food than gathering ever could, enough to feed families through the harshest winters. With surplus came something humanity had never known before: the luxury of time, to think, to create, to dream. Not everyone had to search for food anymore, and in that freedom, civilization found its first breath of life. Some could tend the fields, while others crafted tools, built shelters, or watched the stars and wondered about their meaning. The first villages appeared like islands in an ocean of wilderness, clusters of mud brick homes surrounding the precious fields. Jericho rose from the desert, its walls the first ever built to protect not wanderers, but people who had chosen to stay. The walls were made of stone, carried from distant hills, each rock a testament to the commitment to permanence and place. What would these first farmers think if they could see what their simple decision would eventually become across the millennia? But agriculture was not just abundance. It was also the beginning of inequality, of ownership, of mine and yours. Those who controlled the best land, the most water, the largest harvests began to accumulate power that had never existed before. The seeds of civilization carried within them the seeds of hierarchy, of kings and slaves, of the rich and the poor. In Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the first cities grew from farming villages into centers of trade and power. Uruk rose with temples that touched the sky, monuments to gods who controlled the rain and the harvest's success or failure. Priests became powerful because they claimed to speak for the gods who decided whether the crops would flourish or wither and die. Writing was invented not for poetry or stories, but to count the grain stored in massive warehouses that fed thousands of mouths. Clay tablets pressed with wedge-shaped marks recorded who owned what, who owed whom, the mathematics of a settled world. The first written words were lists and numbers, the practical language of agriculture and the surplus it created. in abundance. But with writing came memory that could outlast any single human life, stories that could be told across the generations. The Epic of Gilgamesh was carved into stone, the first great story of civilization, of a king who sought immortality and failed. Agriculture spread like a slow fire across the continents, each culture adapting the idea to their own land and climate. In the Nile Valley, farmers learned to read the river's annual flood, planting when the waters receded and left behind fertile mud. Egypt rose on the back of wheat and barley, its pyramids built by workers fed with bread from the endless golden fields. In China, rice paddies transformed the landscape into terraced steps that climbed the mountains like a stairway to the heavens above. In the Americas, corn was born from a wild grass through centuries of patient selection, each generation choosing the best seeds. The Maya built cities in the jungle, clearing the trees to plant the sacred corn that they believed humans were made from. Each civilization grew around its staple crop,
their gods and stories reflecting the plant that sustained them through the seasons and years. But agriculture demanded sacrifice. The freedom of the wanderer was traded for the back-breaking labor of the field and harvest. Dawn to dusk, farmers bent over the earth, planting, weeding, harvesting. Their lives tied to the soil in ways that were inescapable. Diseases spread more easily in crowded villages, and famines struck when the rains failed, or when locusts darkened the sky completely. The stored grain attracted rats and mice, and with them came plagues that swept through populations with devastating and merciless speed. Yet despite the hardships, agriculture continued to spread, because the alternative was starvation for a population that had grown too large. There was no going back to hunting and gathering once the population had swelled beyond what the wild land could support. Humanity had crossed a threshold, and on the other side was a world of cities, armies, empires, and all the glory and horror they brought. What if agriculture was not just a choice, but a trap that we walked into willingly, seduced by the promise of security? The fields needed constant attention, the irrigation channels needed maintenance, the walls needed guards to protect the precious harvest from raiders and thieves. Armies were born from the need to defend the surplus, and soon they were used to take surplus from others in conquest. War became organized and brutal, no longer the skirmishes of wandering bands, but the clash of thousands fighting for land and resources. The first empires rose and fell like waves, each one built on the foundation of agricultural surplus and the power it provided. Not just military power, but the power to feed scribes and artists, engineers and philosophers, all the minds that would advance human knowledge. The wheel was invented, the plow was perfected, bronze was smelted, and iron was forged in the fires of civilization's relentless advance. Each innovation made farming more efficient, which fed more people, which demanded more innovation, in an accelerating cycle of growth and change. The population exploded across the millennia, from millions to billions, all dependent on the fields that covered the earth like a green blanket. Forests were cleared, wetlands were drained, rivers were diverted, the landscape itself transformed by the hand of the farmer and the plow. The wild world retreated before the advance of agriculture, and with it went countless species that could not adapt to the changing world. The megafauna that had survived the Ice Age fell not to climate change, but to the expansion of farmland and the hunters it supported. Mammoths and giant sloths, saber-toothed cats and direwolves all vanished as humans reshaped the earth to feed their growing numbers.
Agriculture created civilization, but it also created an ecological debt that we are still paying in the soil erosion and extinction of today.
The question that haunts us now is whether the same system that built our world can sustain it into an uncertain future ahead. Today, half the habitable land on Earth is used for agriculture, a testament to how completely this ancient decision transformed the planet itself. We have 7 billion mouths to feed, and the number grows with each passing day, each one dependent on the harvest and the rain. The farmers of the Fertile Crescent could never have imagined that their simple act of planting seeds would lead to this global transformation. They were just trying to survive, to feed their families, to make it through one more winter without the fear of starvation and death. But their decision echoed across time, shaping the destiny of our species in ways both magnificent and terrifying in their scope and consequence. Agriculture gave us art and science, literature and law, all the achievements we celebrate as the pinnacle of human accomplishment and progress. It also gave us slavery and war, inequality, and environmental destruction, the shadows that follow every bright achievement of our kind throughout history. The stone foundations of the first villages still lie beneath the soil of the Fertile Crescent, waiting to tell their ancient story. Archaeologists dig through layers of time, finding the charred remains of wheat from 10,000 years ago, still recognizable after all the millennia. In those ancient seeds, we can read the story of selection and cultivation, of humans shaping plants and plants shaping human society. The wild grasses became dependent on humans to spread their seeds, and humans became dependent on the grasses to survive the seasons. It was a partnership written in the very DNA of the crops we still plant today in fields that stretch to every horizon. Modern wheat, rice, and corn bear little resemblance to their wild ancestors, transformed by centuries of patient human selection and care. We shaped them to feed us, and in doing so, we shaped ourselves into a species that could no longer survive without them. The birth of agriculture was the birth of a new kind of human, one who lived by the calendar and the plow rather than the hunt. We became creatures of routine and ritual, marking time by planting and harvest rather than by the migration of herds across the plains. Our bodies changed too. We grew shorter from the less varied diet. Our teeth decayed from the starches we consumed in unprecedented quantities. But our brains grew restless with the time that agriculture provided, building monuments and asking questions about the stars and the gods above. The first astronomers were farmers who needed to know when to plant, watching the heavens for signs that the seasons were about to change. The first mathematicians were scribes who needed to count the grain, developing the numbers and symbols that would unlock the secrets of the universe. Agriculture was not just about food. It was about the transformation of the human mind from survivor to creator, from wanderer to builder of worlds. Today we stand at another threshold, facing challenges that the first farmers could never have imagined in their wildest dreams or darkest fears. Climate change threatens the stability of the agricultural systems that feed billions, bringing droughts and floods that devastate the harvest each year. Soil erosion strips away the foundation of our food supply, the precious topsoil that took thousands of years to form, washing into the rivers and seas. Yet we continue to innovate, developing new crops and techniques, trying to balance the need to feed humanity with the need to preserve the earth. Vertical farms rise in cities, Hydroponics and aquaponics promise food without soil. Genetic engineering offers crops that can survive the changing climate ahead. We are still farmers at heart, still trying to coax abundance from the earth, still making the same gamble our ancestors made long ago. The difference is that now we understand the stakes, the fragility of the stakes system we have built on the foundation of those first planted seeds. Have you ever held a seed in your hand and thought about the weight of history it carries, the civilizations that rose from such small beginnings? Agriculture was humanity's greatest invention, and perhaps its most dangerous. The decision that set us on a path we can no longer leave behind. We are bound to the fields as surely as the crops are bound to the soil, dependent on the harvest for our survival and our future. The story of agriculture is the story of civilization itself, of all our triumphs and all our failures, written in furrows across the earth. It is a story that began 10,000 years ago in a valley between two rivers, and it continues today in every field and farm across the world. The first farmers planted more than seeds. They planted the future of our species, for better and for worse, in soil that remembers everything. And as we face the challenges of the 21st century, we must remember that we are still those farmers, still gambling with the earth and our future. The harvest is never guaranteed, but we plant anyway, hoping that the earth will give back what we need to survive one more season in the sun.